You're using that camera to do it. How's it going? Yes. How do you know what that feels like? Yes. Yeah. Get about it. Let's talk about that. Yeah. Yeah.
wrote at 5 o'clock this morning when I was thinking about today and what I want to get out of today and come to set the tone. So, in a time when we see the UN and Tim Cook talk about the weaponisation of data, Silicon Valley voters demanding that tech companies be responsible for their communities through taxes. The government has announced a special digital services tax on US technology firms. We are seeing the rise of individuals' understanding and realisation of the potential power of digital citizenship, especially through civic and campaign groups such as Change.org. Is this the start of a coordinated backlash against those who currently hold power and assume responsibility over the distribution and use of digital technologies? And what is the role of politics within that context? We are all living and existing in a digital world, and regardless of the who, where, what, and how of our political views, or our relationship with tech, in the developed world at least, we are digital citizens first. And as such, we don't just want to exist, we want to thrive, to be free. And in order to do that, there needs to be a redistribution of power and responsibility. And that starts with our relationship with politics at a local, national, and global level. The very idea of it, the definition, and the realisation of the impact of where its many tendrils reach. And so, this summit has been curated to bring together the voices of the people, of representatives from different political parties, of activists, of think tanks, of civic and campaign organisations to discuss and debate the needs, wants and desires of both sides of the political spectrum in this fourth industrial revolution. Thank you. So, as I said, my name is Ada Paris. I would like to invite my co-host, where is he? Ishan Akbar, to the stage as well. Hello, hello. So a little introduction for me. I am a technology philosopher. I'm really interested in the impact of technology on human potential and how we can use it to augment that. Also an artist. I think I could go on, but I can't.
She can go on.
Yes, I can.
Hi everyone, how are you? Good. Well, lovely to see you. My name is Ishan, I'm the co-host today. Who was at the Politics Summit last year? Good, 3 people. It was very good last year, so what Alvin's done is expanded his network to around the rules for Alvin. So my name is Ishan, by day, by night actually, I'm standing in the meeting, that's my actual job. By day I do nothing, so I'm here. So I guess it's important to just give a bit of context. The 10th to 13th of November, this date, 1789, Ben Franklin coined the phrase, nothing is certain in life but death and taxes. What a fact. So today, what is certain is tech's going to be like the future of everything. And the other thing that's certain is all of you are thinking, what's the Wi-Fi code, Ishan? So the Wi-Fi, so we've got the thing here, the hashtag is hashtag PS18 at the fourth group. And the Wi-Fi is a tabernacle guest. And the password is lime explosion. I don't know what happened in their life, but that's lime explosion. And the toilets, if you want to find them, go out there, turn left, go round. Remember that it's fully lit, you can see what you're doing. So I am Ishan, I'm going to be doing this stuff. We're going to have you introduce the panel in a minute. Let's talk about stuff. You guys are going to be at the tables throughout the day, get some games, we're going to make sure you guys get to know each other. But first, to kick off, we're going to show you a quick video about where tech's going to be. So Ollie, our tech guy, can place the video, please.
Is it that one? I'm glad to meet you. Hello, Goo.
Hey,
There's something from the house.
you have to say hey.
Hey, Goo. Okay, Goo. What the weather? You want to know what is the weather? Tomorrow.
In Frankfurt Beach tomorrow, there'll be showers with a high of 65 and a low of 56.
What's it there? I'm scared. I'm scared. It's a mystery. Oh my gosh. God. Cuckoo! And cuckoo.
Hey,
Hey, okay.
Tomorrow in London, it'll be sunny with a high of 41.
The temperature in London.
well, I asked you to play your favorite song.
Play your favorite song.
Cuckoo. Cuckoo.
Yeah, you're cool.
Play a song for me. Tienen que sin bella. Addio dei giorni passati. Addio.
So, okay, you don't have to tap it first, but to wake it up, you have to either say, hey, Google, or okay.
Hey, cuckoo. Okay.
Play an Italian song.
Play an Italian
So
song.
it has to light up after we say that, otherwise it didn't hear you correctly.
You know your salame perché mio che sei così. Okay.
You're stupid. I don't understand anything I'm saying to you.
Hello, cuckoo.
Hey or okay?
Okay.
Google.
Do it.
So there we are. This is an example of what technological change can feel like to people. And certainly to us, text seems to be changing almost every week. Right? So like my dad, he's 56, and the other day he was like, Google's racist. I'm like, what do you mean by that? He goes, he doesn't understand what I'm saying. Well, I asked him to say, hey. I go, hey, Google. I'm like, it's not going to understand. It's not going to understand you doing that, right? So what I'm going to do is, in a bit of a tech moment, I want you guys all to get to know each other. You've all got your phones with you. What I want you to do is play a game. I want you to pull out the 9th picture on your camera roll and explain the story behind it to the person next to you. I can see some trepidation already. Data privacy is important, eh? Right? So look up your 9th picture, look at the person next to you, and explain the 9th picture on your camera roll, and don't hide the picture, guys. I can see you hiding the phone on the table. So do that for the next 5 minutes, get to know each other, we'll come in 2 seconds.
Hello? Okay. Are we going to have to do I was trained to be a primary school teacher. I need a great way that I used to get the kids to stop talking was go like this. And then just notice slowly my hands would go like this. And everybody would go, what's she doing? So, how was that? The reason we got you to do that is because data sharing. It's the idea of data sharing in real life. That uncomfortability about exposing part of your life that maybe you haven't been quite ready to share. So it was just, does anybody want to share how that felt? Or you actually don't know? Definitely not.
Or share like the funniest story you've heard, the interesting person next to you. There's a really funny or interesting thing you saw. Okay? Everyone's boring. Still too early. Why? No one's got an interesting life. Great, good group. So politics. So just a reminder again for those of you who wanted the Wi-Fi password, it's Line Explosion, LINEEXPLOSION, Line Explosion. Spelling bee reference, okay, never mind. What we're going to do, throughout the day, we're going to play a quick game. You've got some post-its as well. Aidan and I are going to play a game of Ask Siri. And so I'm going to be Siri. So what you're going to do, you can ask any question, no matter how uncomfortable, the kind of question you want to ask, Google. You don't want anyone else to find out you're typing this in, right? Write it onto a post-it. We'll collect it during the breaks and various points of the day. We're going to play Ask Siri. Does that sound fun? Okay, 2 people. Good. Right.
And we will not filter the questions. He's going to be Siri, I will be doing the asking, and he's going to have to come up with an answer.
Quite the time. I'm trying to keep myself busy during the day.
It's new material for you.
Yes, new material.
Okay, so now to move on. I would now like to invite our host, the guy who is responsible for all of this, the CEO and founder of the Fourth Group, Aaron Carpio, to come to the stage.
How you all doing? I'm a bit short, so I've got to put this a bit lower. Yeah, I've been telling short jokes my whole life. And baby face jokes, because I don't like a baby. But listen, it's absolutely brilliant to have you all here at Politics Summit 2018. First of all, I want to say a big, huge thank you to our co-hosts for starting the day, Ada and Ishan. Also, I want to thank everyone who made this happen to get you all here. The Fourth Group is an organisation which was set up 2 years ago, but we wouldn't be where we were without the strong support of all of our volunteers. So if volunteers who are effectively the team behind this, could you put your hands up? This is the result of all of their efforts. To bring it to where we are currently sat here in the Tabernacle. This place is quite historic. If you go downstairs, you can see a lot of the photos of, there's one of Muhammad Ali and so forth. This place used to be a church, and then it was taken over by the hippies. And then actually it's become a really strong kind of center for the community in the local area, where people celebrate, particularly during Carnival, for example, but every single night, children come after school to do work and learn and do new homework, and it really is, I guess, a fashion example of local rooted community centre. Today, of course, we've been talking about a lot of big topics, so it was nice to kind of start off on a light-hearted note, but there are big questions which we face, and the kinds of questions that we're going to be asking and hopefully discussing and exploring today. First off, how is tech impacting our society? How do we as citizens respond to some of these changes? What's the role of politics in terms of addressing some of the new social problems? And how can we, I guess, in this room, think about our role as global citizens? I think, to keep it short, because we've got a lot of amazing content coming up, I hope that you enjoy today, but also I hope you kind of leave your hat away, and I know multiple of you kind of have multiple hats, so kind of let's have a heart-to-heart, let's have a proper discussion where we can just sit down eye to eye and have a real honest, open, and hopefully actionable conversation to today. Again, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who made this possible. We are about to hear from the community members to launch a global inquiry findings report. And then we're going to have a series of keynotes, panel discussions, Q&A, and then we'll have an interactive session finalized by a keynote at the end. To end, I hope you all get to know each other. This is not a typical summit where people have different colored badges. This is about all of us having a proper conversation and networking and get to know each other. So hopefully you learn some new stuff, engage in the debate, have your say. but also take something which can then have an impact in the world. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll give it back to our co-host. Thanks so much.
Right, so we'll crack on with the day then. So as Apple just mentioned, we're going to talk about this report. So in 2018, the Fourth Group of Partners ran the Global Inquiry into Citizens in the Digital Age, and today marks the launch of that report. So to talk us through that report, I'd like to invite onto the stage Nizam Udman. There we go. Round of applause for Nizam Udman, please. Try and keep clapping until he comes to the stage, it's very awkward. There we go, keep going, right, he's there, excellent.
Let's see. Hi, good morning, everyone. So my name is Nizam Udman. I am representing a wonderful institution today called SOAS, which is School of Words and African Studies, where I'm a trustee, and we are one of the community partners. So to introduce, over the weekend, like many of you, was watching the centenary commemoration for 100 years since the end of the armistice. And it really dawned on me, made me think, what were many of those men in particular, but actually men and women who sacrificed, millions of them from across the world, what were they sacrificing themselves for? What values, what freedoms do we now take for granted that we forget about very regularly? It really made me think over the weekend some of the things that we possibly take for granted right now. And in particular, and there's some really interesting works out there around when people went out, what were the values that they were fighting for? What would the world have looked like if in either Great War, if it had flipped to the other side? What would we be talking about today? And it really, really makes me think. Of course, 100 years later, the world is a drastically different place. In fact, we're having a conversation today about a tech revolution, and digital technologies are transforming the way we live. Just on my way here, I jumped into an Uber, the way we work. I'll be working remotely today, the way we play. I won't talk about love life, it's a whole different ballgame, but it transforms and transcends every part of our lives. And for the most part, that's brilliant. It's exciting. So yesterday, I'm sure you can appreciate, I have an iPhone, and I yanked my cable and I broke, or whatever. And I wanted a new one, so I went on Amazon and I bought a new one. It's going to arrive in the next 60 minutes. That was at 5 p.m. It's amazing, right? I have Amazon Prime, and very quickly I have my cable. Brilliant luxury, brilliant convenience. In the context of today, I was just thinking, what have I compromised for that service? For that luxury, what have I given away? What data have I given away? On the way here, just looking at Google, I asked Alexa in the morning, what's the weather like today? And again, asking Alexa what the weather's like, I realize I'm promoting Amazon heavily. There are other, I feel like it's like a BBC commercial. There are other providers out there in the market. But it makes me think, what have we compromised to do that? And in many ways, actually, there is a compromise to every single thing that we take for granted. And juxtaposed to the very visceral and tangible values and freedoms that are being fought, that we celebrated over the weekend, I asked myself, do we as citizens in this digital age ask ourselves what values, freedoms do we compromise every single day? Especially when we're transacting them for the sake of luxury. And what's interesting is, whilst I'm representing SOAS here, in my daily life I work for the Prince's Trust, which is a young person's charity working across the country. And every year we have a survey where we ask our young people how they're doing. This year is a year where unemployment for young people is at a record low. But uncertainty amongst young people is at a record high. And the reason for that is many. You can point to political situations like Brexit, but actually, for a lot of young people, 65% of the jobs that they're going to go into doesn't exist right now, because it's all machines and robots and AI and so on and so forth. So that level of uncertainty is something which affects us day to day. And so what this global inquiry does into citizens in the digital age is to better understand the voice of the citizens, especially at a time when actually I would argue we are passive observers in this wonderful system of digital life. How critically minded are we? And so actually what I love about the work the Fourth Group and Alvin are doing is actually asking the very questions that I've been asking over the weekend. And so some of those questions, and this is where what's wonderful is, and you have them right here. What are citizens' rights and responsibilities in the digital age? What are the biggest problems caused by technology? And what can we practically do as citizens to respond to this problem? And importantly, I think part of it is just asking the question, because quite often I think people aren't asking those questions because life's good. Today's 13 degrees Celsius, Alexa told me. It's amazing. I'm coming out having a great day, but in the back of my mind, am I cognizant of the wider consequences of what those 13 degrees look like for the next generation? Whether that's climate change, whether it's something else. And I think that's what this inquiry is doing, adding that level of cognizance that doesn't exist. So the methodology, I'm going to use my phone now because I did make some notes about this, even though it's up there. You had an online in-depth survey. You had 400 people across 14 countries. Again, the experience of digital life here, very different to something that's happening in other parts of the world. We had 12 plus focus groups digging a bit deeper across 8 countries. And it's important to note the online survey wasn't one of those quick and easy ones which we're used to as a one-click generation. It was in-depth. So there was lots of questions there which were really, really important. And I can speak on behalf of SOAS. The reason why we were really interested in being involved in this is, again, part of the curriculum at SOAS is to help students become critically engaged with their society. And that's what this inquiry is doing. And with the help of 9 other amazing partners, One Young World, Democracy to Earth, Color Content, Pan-African Human Rights Defenders, Move.ph, SOAS, Forum 280, Global Social Entrepreneurship Network, Newspeak House, Ports, University of Queensland, Entrepreneur First. Can we give them all a round of applause, please? Within this team who are able to try and unearth some of these questions. And the difficulty, and this is the last thing I'll say before I go off, the difficulty is how do you get people to answer questions on issues when they don't know what they don't know. And I think that's part of what the inquiry does first and foremost, which is to make it relevant. And I think this is scratching the surface. And I think this work that's being unearthed right now is going to be critically important. And I look forward to the rest of the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. So now, one of the things I took away from that is it's about asking the right questions. Being able to ask the right questions, not for ourselves, but also to elicit the information that we want to try and use to help others. So next up on stage, we have Sephora Bilari, who is Associate Director of Community Relations for One Young World. You come off the stage.
Hi everyone, my name is Sephora. I work for One Young World, and for those of you who don't know what it is a global platform for young leaders. We have an incredible community of over 10,000 young leaders who are working across every issue area you can possibly think of, from education, health, law, environment, and they work in 196 countries. And collectively, this is a conservative estimate, they've impacted over 17.5 million people since 2010. And one huge reason why we want to be involved with this inquiry is because these young leaders, while they're driving action on each of the issue areas that they're working on, they don't often get to voice their opinions on issues of data protection, security, and really have their voice involved in these conversations that are happening. We're thrilled that we got such a good response. We had people contributing and hosting focus groups in Colombia, in Lesotho, in corners of the world that genuinely were really hungry to contribute to this. So thank you, Alvin. Thank you to your amazing team for making this a reality, and all other partners, because it's not easy. But after months of amazing work, I'm super proud to have been a part of this. But as you can see, we have a list of rights and responsibilities that this inquiry has come up with. And the rights are all pretty obvious to all of us. We all want privacy. We all want free expression. We all want equal access, corporate transparency, reliable security, and control of our own data. But as the citizen from Sweden says, these rights come with a responsibility, and it's up to each and every one of us to ensure that if we want to foster a world where these rights exist, that we all have to uphold them in our own ways. So I think it's pretty obvious what these responsibilities are, and while we might think of them as obvious, these forums are really critical on driving advocacy on these issues, because if we're not speaking about them here, and if we're not inviting the right people, and if the right people aren't seeing this work being done, then we can't criticize the senators at Zuckerberg's session in Congress where they're completely unaware of what's happening. It's purely because the information and the education is lacking, and we are all collectively responsible for ensuring that we can shape a better outcome for these companies, for us, for our governments. So the responsibilities of each and every one of us has civil behavior, ensuring that we're not part of the hateful and divisive dialogue that we see day in and day out. Awareness and education, taking me back to my Zuckerberg point, I mean, it's quite terrifying and somewhat shameful that we have these huge behemoths that are controlling every factor of our lives and often making them more convenient and making them and creating a more equal footing for a lot of those people, like I was saying, in Colombia and Lesotho. But equally, it's terrifying that these companies not only understand us better than we understand ourselves, but they understand what will tap into our insecurities, what will tap into our wants and desires, and how they can lead us to making a decision where we think that decision is one of free will, but it is within a specific menu of choices. Holding power to account, again, this is one of the forums whereby we can try and do that, but we need to make sure that we are constantly being critical and that we're constantly contributing in any way that we can, because otherwise we will get left behind, and that was the whole point of this inquiry to begin with. Individual accountability, we all have to be masters of our own data destiny, I suppose, because otherwise we only have ourselves to blame. And I mean, you see it in small steps. People are deleting apps, people are not sharing their contact details with apps, but these are small steps towards a bigger picture, and we need to just better inform ourselves about how we can protect ourselves. Stopping online abuse. No longer do we live in a time where you walk down the street and if something's happening, that you might feel that hero complex to step in. What the internet and the advent of all these forums has done is created an anonymity and eliminated that accountability that each of us has. So it's quite dangerous. And with all of this, I mean, I worry more about our future generations than us. Anyone above the age of 18, we're pretty attuned to these issues, but it's really about the children of today and of our future that I'm concerned about. And that leads to self-discipline, because we all can download apps that control the amount of time we spend on our phone. But when I see kids and like my little cousins who are 8 who are defining their self-esteem and shaping their self-esteem on the red button that triggers their endorphin or makes them feel like they're a part of something, and all of that is defined by a really fickle online structure, it's frightening. So it's really about how do we ensure we use and leverage this technology that doesn't harm us but benefits us. And it's going to take time to really find the answers, but I think we're all here because we want to be a part of it and ensure that we can create a better outcome for all of us. So thank you, Alvin, again, for all of your work. I look forward to hearing from the rest of you today, and I would love to chat with you guys how we can take this work forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sephora. The next question we're going to report explored was what are the biggest problems caused by technology? And to give us a bit of insight into this, I'm going to invite Andrus Vollen, the founder and president of V4SDG, into the stage. Round of applause for Andrus.
Hello everyone, I'm Andrus Vollen and I hosted one of the focus group discussions in Hungary. And what's been interesting for me while I was looking at the results of the report in terms of what we perceive as the biggest problems caused by technology, that a country like Hungary that we usually perceive as something different, maybe sort of split between developing and developed countries, I actually managed to discover the very same problems perceived, which sort of led me to the conclusion that this issue that we are facing right now is truly global and is truly extending through different groups and classes of people. But enough of that talk. I really need to get into a lot of listing for you, because I will be telling you what problems have been identified in sort of 6 different levels of examination by this report. And that can get a little tedious and a little boring. So I would like to ask you, what I'm telling you about these problems, please ask yourself if you've seen these problems before in your life, or you've thought about it. So starting with the personal level, they identified as problems overstimulation, addiction, privacy, loneliness, cybercrime, mental and physical health issues, child development, and narcissism. Then, sort of building from that, we were thinking about the world we perceive, and in that we identified 4 issues: a separation from nature, filter bubbles, disinformation, and a disconnect from reality. Then, another one level above, we have social interactions, less face-to-face interaction, the dehumanization of connection, trolling, cyberbullying, online hate, hypocrisy, breakdown of society, and a lack of civility. Above that, at business and work, inequality, regulatory issues, data mining and manipulation, automation and unemployment, as well as a lack of corporate accountability. And at the political level, we've seen censorship, mass surveillance, the growing or overgrowth of the influence of companies such as Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. Public opinion manipulation, corporate exploitation, the hijacking of elections, as well as polarization and division, which led us to the very last circle, which is the perception of an existential threat to humankind as a whole: killer robots, AI takeover, environmental disaster, and transhumanism. Well, as I told you, I thought that I might get slightly different results in Hungary in my group, because we always think that, well, in some way or another my group will be different. But it turned out that we pretty much ended up with the very same problems that have been identified all around the world. And that led me to this idea that from a personal to an existential level, we see a pattern of losing control, identities challenged, our communities being broken up. Essentially, and here I would like to join Sephora, a challenge to the concept of free will. People sort of losing trust in the idea that they can influence their future. But what I also felt that at this point, probably we still have time to go the other way around, because people are also genuinely willing to shape their future in the face of the challenges posed by technological change, and thereby, hopefully, we will be able to reap the benefits while still maintaining a healthy and sustainable life for all on Earth. So that's what I would like to close with. That as much as we see loads of problems caused by technological change, there is still a genuine willingness to turn this into something good. And I would like to thank Alvin too on this, because with this report, I think that we might be able to identify some of the key tools that we can use to counter these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. And now to discuss what are the 6 sins and virtues of the digital age, I'd like to invite Peter Tashko, from Director of Global Social Entrepreneurship Network. Peter,
Thank you very much. I'm going to join the kind of chorus of thanks to Alvin and his team for putting together this event, for putting together the 4th group over the last 2 years, and of course the inquiry itself. I do feel like we're, in a sense, at the beginning of the journey, though, because the report itself and the findings that we're showing today are really just the beginning. And what I've come to share with you, I think, is more around what, as active citizens, can we do to put in place some of the recommendations and explore in more detail, as Andras said, really, some of the things that we learned from speaking to people all over the world. And again, as Alvin said, we all wear a number of different hats, and we all come with those hats today. There's one I'm going to kind of cheekily keep on, if that's okay, which is my kind of day job. So I run something called the Global Social Entrepreneurship Network. Bit of a mouthful, but basically we have 60 members in 70 countries around the world, and they all place funding and support into the hands of social entrepreneurs, so change makers, who want to start some kind of business, wherever they are in the world, to do that effectively. So we're really talking about active citizens that may not always be using technology, it may not be a social tech venture, but they're using that to make some kind of change. So I'm really hoping that our network can help to cascade some of the findings to those people, and again, put more power, funding, and opportunity into their hands. But really onto the presentation itself, I have the easy job, I suppose, of summarising what are the kind of 6 key sins. And in rehearsing for the presentation, I kept referring to them as the 7 deadly sins, because that's the thing that's kind of common. And I think there's some commonality between the two. What's interesting for me about these findings is that I think, in a sense, we could probably nearly have guessed these if we were asked what the top 6 would be. But I'm not sure I've seen them written anywhere. I've not seen anybody say, actually, okay, these are some of the real challenges we face in tech today. But here they are. So the number 1 is addiction. So we can get a sense of things like online gaming. I can name a whole bunch of stuff. Addictions that inflict upon us in our offline world can be transferred online. Ignorance, an awful lot of groupthink. So social networks, I think, promote relationships and social circles that are broadly similar. Think about how many people in your network disagree with your broad view of the world. For me, certainly, that is worryingly little. Hate, I think we all know that if you look at, I guess, the comment section of any newspaper online, or really Twitter on a daily basis, sadly, you'll see a bunch of hateful comments there if you just scroll down a couple of pages, or even less. Narcissism, we all enjoy a bit of a selfie, but I think there's a more dangerous side to that in terms of, what's the limit of self-promotion, at what point do we really challenge our own values there. Disconnection, so how connected are we to the world, and I think Sephora already touched on that. Fakeness, that's the most obvious one around fake news, I don't need to cover that, we're all very familiar. So they're really the 6 key sins here, but what are the virtues? So some of these, I guess, are the opposite of the sins, in a sense, but I think it goes a little bit further than that. So actually having awareness of the world around us. Again, I feel like many of us in this room feel like we're global citizens, we're pretty aware of what's going on in the world, but I wonder how aware we really are. What are our sources of media that we refer to on a daily basis, and how limiting are our views on that basis? Love, so it's World Kindness Day today. I'm not sure how many of you have known that. You might pick that up off Twitter today, possibly, but actually showing people love in a real and meaningful way that doesn't involve a like or pressing another heart button on Twitter. Community, so how much real community is there? So again, how many times are we coming to wonderful old historic community buildings and spaces like this in a week? Or how much of that community is purely on our social networks? How many of these people have we actually ever met that we call our friends? Humanity, how much do we relate to people as other human beings, whether we agree with them or not? How much dehumanization is going on in the media, whether it's technology, media, or otherwise? Truth, obviously a really tough word, because truth is grey area, it's a spectrum. But when it comes to how we share, how we relate to truth, do we know for sure what we're saying is right? Are we promoting people online who are confident what they're showing is right? It's complicated. Temperance as well. So really that balance, the idea that you give and you take. And I feel like today in the modern world, we do a lot of taking and perhaps not as much giving. And it's coming up to Christmas, of course, that I think is even more important. So these were the 12 things that we identified. So Andreas really broke that down issue by issue, but these were the top 12. And what we're going to go away and do to segue into the next presentation is really look at actually how we can take the key findings from the report and put them into the hands of active citizens. Obviously, many of you are in the room today, but I think you are our nose, you're our networkers that will take this into your broad audiences. You may already be on social media sharing this now. So please do take these away, and thanks for your time.
Very interesting, thank you, Peter. So these sins and virtues, we need a way to try and respond. So what do citizens believe are practical ways to respond. To help us answer this question, I'd like to invite Marlon Mehra, who's the Chief Executive of the Globe Legislators Institute. Marlon. Taking the sweet time, don't worry. We're going on. Thanks, we are.
Good morning, everyone. It's such a delight to see such a full room. As an organizer, I really want to commend Alvin and his team on getting such a fantastic turnout. It's really hard sometimes. You know, every day there are hundreds of competing events, and you've chosen to spend your day here with the fourth group, with partners discussing the global inquiry and what the implications are for citizenship. So I'm delighted to be able to present what the citizens actually said in this inquiry that we should be doing. Before I start, however, you can see these and have a look at these while I'm talking. Just to remind you of the term citizenship. It's actually quite a problematic notion. Those of you who recall the infamous, rather quaint words of Theresa May, that if you're a global citizen, you're a citizen of nowhere. Citizenship actually defines a legal relationship between a state and an individual. And we are all at least citizens of one country, some of you more. I'm a citizen of India, and my country does not permit Indian citizens to be citizens of any other country. The United States, the UK, many European nations, however, do so. And so we are quite limited in our understanding of how we can engage with our countries, our policies, our politics as citizens. So this inquiry and this notion of citizenship is actually quite a radical shake-up, because it's inviting us to move out of the box in which we are placed by our leadership, by our governments, by states, and to think transnationally, to think beyond borders, and to think radically as citizens of planet Earth. So I think that before we go into this, it's really look at what that term means for us and our engagement. So we've seen this concentric circular chart before, in which each of these have been explained by Andres, but I'm just going to pick up on what the different elements were of each of these concentric circles, from going from the personal to the existential. What are the key themes that were picked out by the respondents? And so starting with the personal, the things that were really highlighted was at a personal level, the need for critical thinking, for limiting our own usage of the internet, of social media, and of the importance of education. I have a very personal relationship, as I'm sure every parent does, to this particular thing, because those of us who have young children, our lives are dominated by internet and cyber pestering. It's the one thing that leads to most arguments, tensions in the family environment, and we are still quite hapless in knowing how best to deal with it, because we are not digital natives, our children are digital natives and have a very different connection with the new media and with internet and the possibility of a digital world. When we look at the next circle, when we look at the world we perceive, the respondent said we really, really need to protect truth. We need new technology to fight bullies and the fake news. And we need citizen-friendly technology. Moving to the next boundary, if we look at our social interactions, what we really need, and this has come up again and again in previous speakers, is the importance of a new civility, of a netiquette. If we move further and we think about the workplace, what the implications are of what respondents are telling us for their work lives, for the businesses that they run or work in. The importance, starting at the very top, of equality of access. Equality of access, very, very important, especially if you look at the subdivisions of those issues around access to equal speed, internet speed, access to equal information. So equality of access in the respondents has really been, in many of their responses, has been disaggregated further. The importance of accountability. I could say much more, and I will, in my closing thoughts on this, in particular referring to the organisation that I work with and the constituency that we work with, which are lawmakers, and it takes me to the next reference point, which is the importance of the right kind of legislation and regulation. New forms of monetizing, new business models. for these new technologies. And also the power that we have, which is an age-old power, the power of consumer boycotts, boycotting corporations. If we then move to the second to last sphere, I don't know if all of you can read it, I'm having a hard time from here, but political. So what can we do there? Is we can devise, just as we are today, we're coming together in new groupings to have new civic and global peace movements, different kind of movements. A global political party. This was particularly interesting because actually how I met Albin was because we met through something called the Global Governance Prize, which I was an ambassador for. It was hosted by the Swedish Global Challenges Foundation earlier this year. And we were looking at supporting and awarding some of the best thinking around the world on new entities, new international entities for multilateral action. So if the UN was not fit for purpose, what could we do with the UN at present or beyond the UN? So the notion of a global political party, hurrah, this is still continuing to evade us and challenge us. The notion of a digital Bill of Rights, really important. Everybody in the room will be familiar with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And that is in urgent need, not just of implementation and enforcement, of course, but of expansion in the digital age. And this theme had come up in terms of what citizens can do to empower themselves and have a new framework for individual liberty in the digital age. And the final sphere there refers to the existential risks that there are. What can we do about them? Well, I think I may have misread the earlier one, but that's just as relevant, is the need for new movements, the new global civic movements, and finally, that the D20 that we should have, just like the G20, which is taking place at the end of the month in Argentina, that we should have a D20, that 20 of the world's biggest nations should be discussing the impact of technology on citizens. So this is the response that we've had, the practical ways that respondents feel that we can address the challenges. And if you move to the next slide, we'll actually see what some of the individual calls were. This is going to be really challenging to read, but I'm going to highlight a few of these. So if we start at the very, very top, I mean, it's all about the things that we can individually do from a very micro level. You know, to go out there and to sign petitions, to make a conscious effort to limit our technology use. We've come across that before, of being responsible with how much personal data we share. I mean, this is just so horrific that, you know, when you come in here and you sign up for using the Wi-Fi code, that you're signing away your personal data, which is not defined for you. Well, we're going to take this information from your smartphone, but we are all guilty of it, and we are all allowing ourselves to be guinea pigs in this monstrous global experiment that nobody seems to be in charge of. But yeah, what people are saying is that we should be smarter, we should be more thoughtful, we should be asking for more information, which is easily accessible and user-friendly. The importance of online safety, data protection, educating people. Again, if you look at the columns over there, it's all about what we can do at a micro level, individual level, on using our consumer power for boycotting the wrong kind of companies, using and campaigning for better mechanisms of redress, engaging and supporting counter-speech to fight against all sorts of ills. Terrorism is just one which has been mentioned over there. Educating our children to understand their responsibilities, lobbying and advocating to leaders and governing bodies. And finally, uniting as citizens to ensure that our collective voice is heard. Now, going through this, I was really interested, and I think that the speaker before me may also have noticed this, that there was something missing. And what I found missing was there's nothing about creating an alternative. Why don't we create alternatives? Why don't we have alternatives to Facebook? So many of us who were not Facebook users really to begin with, but may have had a dormant account, like I've had for a number of years, just want to actually boycott Facebook. And there are many movements out there to boycott Facebook. But even beyond that, there are alternatives to Facebook. There are at least 8 known alternatives to Facebook, ranging from Dig to Vivo. I mean, you know, you Google and you will find them. Why aren't we talking about the alternatives and supporting those? The other thing that I found, and I'm going to speak to my day job, which is working with lawmakers, is that we have an assumption that regulators and lawmakers, who are our elected representatives, actually have so much more power and resource than they do. In my experience of working with lawmakers around the world, and GLOBE is one of the world's oldest organizations, which is an independent cross-party network of lawmakers who unite around issues of environmental stewardship and climate change, that actually most of our members are deeply, deeply under-resourced. And I would say that for those of you who have MPs in this country, please don't think that they have stacks and stacks of people working in their offices, and they are absolutely loaded in terms of resources. Actually, they're not. They're desperately underfunded, and they're always looking for people to support them, providing information. If you have great reports, make sure that you're sending them to parliamentary libraries, because that's the first place that their researchers will go to. Right now in the UK Parliament, we have something really interesting going on. It's an inquiry which is led by the chair, Damian Collins, he's a Conservative, of the Committee on Digital, Culture, Media and Sports, the DCMS inquiry, which is looking into disinformation and fake news. Damian Collins has been absolutely like a dog with a bit between his teeth on the issues that we've spoken about digital supremacy, about corruption, about dark money in elections, etc. And very few people outside the Westminster bubble even know what's going on. But I want to mention it today because today is really, really significant. I'm just going to end on this point in terms of what are the things that we can do. So Damian Collins joined up with 4 other parliaments. He joined up with Parliament in Argentina, in Canada, in Ireland, and the 5th country is going to evade me now. But anyway, there were 5 of them. Australia, excuse me. And he teams up with the chairs of all of his counterpart committees in challenging Mark Zuckerberg to come before them in the way that he had come before the European Parliament and the US Congress to answer questions around Facebook's role on these issues. They sent an invitation at the end of October, and Zuckerberg, or somebody at Facebook, sent a really dismissive paragraph in reply. It was called Dismissive Reply by Damian Collins. Damian Collins said, "We are holding an international grand inquiry on the 27th of November in London, and our 5 parliaments, who are the elected representatives of 170 million Facebook users, invite you to come before us." The deadline for that was yesterday. If you want to, as an action point, follow up on that with Damian Collins, with your MPs, I think that you will do something at a much larger scale around these issues of individual effort. So didn't want to make that too much of a big pitch, but I think it really encapsulates where we are as individuals who can do something and how we can use the power of our citizenship through our lawmakers to do something even bigger. So thank you very much, and I'm now going to invite Albert, or sorry, the lady over here to take over. Thank you so much.
Now I'd like to invite Alvin back to the stage with some exciting news about what next we inquiry.
Okay, the morning is nearly over. The citizens have spoken. We shared, as you've just seen, voices of 400 people from 40 different countries, and hopefully the report, Cyril is just about to refresh it, so don't worry about that. We've heard from people through the report. If you want to download the report, just go to weareunitedcitizens.org. There's a thumbnail of the report which you can download. The 4th group itself is a public advocacy group, and we were founded in 2016 in the wake of Brexit. I think the personal story for me is I was a lobbyist for people in poverty at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation at the time. Right now, Google can help me in reminding me what I need to say next. And I had attended Davos in 2016 when they coined the term the 4th Industrial Revolution. And as a history and politics student, seeing a new industrial revolution being shaped mainly by C-level executives and world leaders, my big question was how can we have ordinary citizens and ordinary folk to help bring their interests to the table? And that's when the 4th group was set up. So our first step was to do this inquiry in partnership with our 10 partners. And we've listened and you've just heard what they've said. What is the next step? Perfect timing from Cyril. I felt like a news anchor there, just trying to kill time. This is the next step. Today we are launching a crowdfunder for United Citizens. United Citizens is a global democratic membership organization where people who are members have a say in who the elected representatives are, as well as the campaigns in which we go for. Our pitch is that it is a democratic movement, and hopefully one which is permanent. In its first instance, the issues that we are going to address will be based on a lot of the things that come out of the inquiry. And as you can see here, first step is to recruit members, crowdfund, elect our board, vote for campaigns, and then campaign for change. I'll leave it there. If you'd like to see more information, go to www.crowdfunder.com/United-Citizens. It'll be on Twitter as well. That's crowdfunder.co.uk/United-Citizens. We're now going to see a film which kind of covers some of the issues that we've raised in the inquiry, and then we're going to go into a break. I think just to end, hopefully you've heard a lot of interesting ideas from these people who engage in the inquiry. And next, we're actually going to have a conversation with you and panelists on the stage to open up that conversation. So I'll leave it up to the video, and then we're going to have a break. Thanks.
Right then, so as Alvin said, we're going to take a break now. Please need to get back for 12 minutes past 11. If you are walking in while we're on stage, I'm going to embarrass you. So 12 minutes past 11, and all the people you saw this morning, please make their names written down so we can get in touch with them, contact them, and speak to them and continue the conversation. So a round of applause for everyone you heard from this morning, and we'll see you back at 12 minutes past 11. Thank you.
Is it adding new people?
Yes.